Hello and welcome to the Lebanese Politics Podcast. My name is Nizar Hassan and joined as usual by Benjamin Red. Ben, it's been a long while. How are you,
It has
man?
been forever. Yeah, I'm doing good, but I'm happy to see you up
Yeah,
and out of the hospital and everything.
yeah.
Last week we were supposed to come back last week, and we promised everyone we would come back last week. Sorry about that, everyone. But apparently, a bunch of microbes had other plans, and Nizar, you went to the hospital for food poisoning.
Yeah, I don't know why I always go to the hospital only for food poisoning, bad digestive system, I guess. But like, yeah, it was um, it was a difficult, night or evening, and the second day. But then I'm feeling much better now,
Glad
and
to hear.
yeah, just shout out to the great nurses at ABMC for like giving patients so much care and so much attention around the clock. I don't like them when they walk in at 5 a.m. saying you need an antibiotic. Like, I don't need an antibiotic at 5 a.m. I need to sleep. But other than that, like, I love their care, especially this nurse called Wissam. She was amazing. I'm really like just I was satisfied with this care that I received. Although I feel a lot of empathy with AUB workers because of the bad policies of the administration, including firing a lot of their colleagues and leaving their salaries lagging behind what you really need to live in Lebanon. So just shout out to the nurses specifically and
And
thank you.
especially right now when they're facing this, unprecedented global pandemic, that these are frontline workers, and doing an amazing job. And of course, we're going to talk about coronavirus a little bit later on in the program. But first, we're going to start out the Lebanese Politics Podcast with some American politics for a change, right? We've got big
Yay!
news. Joe Biden appears to have won. The Trump era is over, it seems.
For now.
Well, yeah, for now. We'll see what happens. But yeah, this is. I mean, it's a big deal for the United States, obviously, but also for the world.
Yeah, it is. I mean, how much it will affect Lebanon and the region. There are a lot of, contingencies in there, but we know for sure that Biden will not have the same aggressive approach of Trump towards, things like anti-Palestinian, expansion and support for the right-wing government in Israel, or in terms of the huge campaign against Iran and refusing to sign any reasonable deal or whatever. So we will probably see less escalation in the conflict, but that's a bit far in the future because you can't reverse foreign policy in a few days. You need a while.
Yeah, and if you're talking about like effects on Lebanon, there probably won't be a whole lot of direct effect, but what you're talking about, these regional repositioning of the United States, yeah, there could be some changes there, but I don't think it's not going to be like night and day or anything. Biden may take a more conciliatory line towards Iran, for instance, just because Trump made such a big deal out of blowing up the nuclear agreement with Iran. He may take a slightly harsher stance towards Saudi, towards Israel. But let's remember that there are very long-standing ties between the United States and Israel, between the United States and the Saud family that rules Saudi Arabia. And so any sort of change isn't going to be all of a sudden, oh, he's pro Khamenei and anti MBS or anything. Like, no, there are very much limits. There are definitely limits as to how far U.S. policy can change and how quickly it can change. But those changes may filter down to effects on Lebanon,
Yeah.
sort of indirectly, is my sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to Biden's speech at APAC, the Zionist lobby, at Kamala Harris's speech at APAC, which is probably worse, at the answers they gave when they were asked about Israel, Palestine, etc. You see that I mean, it's not a friend, it's not a friendly administration. It's just a bit less fascistic than than Trump administration in terms of like its anti-Palestinian perspective. But I mean, we shouldn't expect like dramatic changes, but there will definitely be probably um, a different new tools or old tools that are more diplomatic, less sanction based, less military. We'll see.
Yeah, and with that change, there could be theoretically some direct changes when it comes to Lebanon if Gebran Bassil is correct in what he told us today, but we know that just this past week, the United States sanctioned Gebran Bassil, one of the top politicians in Lebanon. He's an MP, longtime minister, although he's not in the government now, and the leader of the Free Patriotic Movement, which is the largest Christian party in the country. The U.S. sanctioned him on Friday, and this was supposedly under a anti-corruption thing, right? So the U.S. for the first time against a Lebanese politician has used the Global Magnitsky Act, which they had sort of, I mean, they had hinted that they were moving in this direction before. And in the last round of sanctions, which hit Ali Hassan Khalil of the Amal movement and Yusuf Tanianos of Marada, both allies of Hezbollah, the U.S. did this sort of weird thing, right, where they talked about anti-corruption in their statements, but then they used the actual legal basis for it was this executive order that George W. Bush signed back in 2001, right in the wake of the September 11th attacks, that was very much geared at anti-terrorism. So it seems that the U.S. has shifted from that sort of weird straddling with those guys to with this sanctions effect actually just going full on for anti-corruption stuff, at least as the legal basis is concerned. But a lot of people have doubts as to that and think that, oh, well, no, the real reason obviously was Gebran Bassil's alliance with Hezbollah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, there is no question that the Hezbollah aspect is the real one, and the corruption one is just a facade, to make it look like they're targeting the least popular politician in Lebanon because of how unpopular he is here and because he's involved in corruption, etc. And Basil was very clear against like the US discourse and the decision in his long 50-minute kind of press talk on Sunday. He said, first, that the Americans are pursuing an agenda that is very dangerous, that is basically about isolating Hezbollah and the Shia and potentially causing civil war in Lebanon. So he said that the FPM deal with Hezbollah, the Memorandum of Understanding, is kind of what saved Lebanon from civil strife, and the Americans are pushing on the same line. And he recalls how things happened in the last few days. One of the things before he got into like how he actually got sanctioned, one of the things you mentioned is that Hariri was insisting on him to be a minister back in summer 2018 when the first early talks of sanctions were there, partly because they knew that Basil might be subjected to sanctions at some point. So being a foreign minister with some diplomatic immunity would help him. And then Hariri switched completely after the experience with the uprising and everything. And Basil said that, at that point, Hariri was like, I wouldn't form a government if Basil has to be in it, as opposed to I want Basil to be in my government. So a big dramatic shift. Anyway, so he's portraying this shift as part of the change in the U.S. As part of the U.S. Political assassination against him. That's these are the words he used. He said that the U.S. funded the Lebanese some parts of the Lebanese revolution, the uprising, as a colored revolution, like they did in other countries. Ukraine, Georgia, etc. Like this theory that these revolutions that against authoritarianism and against sometimes figures or politicians that are against anti-Western imperialism, etc. That these are colored revolutions that are funded so that they can, advance U.S. interests, etc. It's quite a bullshit theory, but it's held by some people among the Hezbollah's left, maybe, and Basil kind of mentioned it very clearly a couple of times that was a colored revolution, and that the U.S. recently called down a top official in the U.S. called down and said you have to break ties with Hezbollah, and then on October 21, Basil met with the ambassador of the U.S. in Lebanon, who told him that he had 4 days. She gave him an ultimatum of 4 days to satisfy 4 demands that the U.S. has, or otherwise face sanctions. Just quite, rude. Just, to be clear, they gave him
It's a big swing for U.S.
Yeah,
policymakers if this is accurate. Which I mean, I don't have any reason to doubt this. It makes sense what Basile said.
yeah. I mean, it makes sense not to accept any like framework of negotiation on this basis, right? But anyway, they told him that you have to break ties with Hezbollah immediately, and three other demands that Basil didn't reveal. otherwise you're facing sanctions. He didn't respond to that. He told them things like, I want to be your friend and not your agent, or you can't treat me in this way, etc. And then he was saying that the Americans were actually ready to support him, and they held a meeting with him where they promised him if he would break up the ties with Hezbollah, regardless of the three other demands, that they would help him financially and politically, and make him a celebrity, which is a weird thing that they said, like superstardom. They promised him superstardom in the US and in Lebanon. I really want to know what they promised him. It's just
according to him.
according to him, yeah. Um, so he said that they had a carrot and a stick, and the sanctions were the stick, but they showed him the carrot first, and he refused. So he's trying to say that he took a strong stance, etc. And then on November 4th, there was a meeting at this place where they gave him 24 hours, just do it or not, as I said, and he didn't. So they hit him with the sanctions. That's his story about what happened. And he said that the US barely mentioned corruption anytime during the whole thing, and they were only focusing on Hezbollah, and they didn't care about other demands. So he said, the relationship is with the US is quite bad now, but he was looking forward for better ones with the Biden Kamala Harris administration. And he said he kind of served some blows to people inside his party who he's saying were betraying him in the recently, including someone who was outside of Lebanon but inside FPM, who was trying to sabotage him. And he said he will he will prosecute this person as part of the arbitrary mechanism inside the party. And he basically you know uh, s- he threw shade on people like Naamat Frem and Shamil Rukos and people who left his parliamentary bloc, saying that they were influenced by foreign interests and domestic interests, etc. So in general, Basir said we're sticking with Hezbollah against this US pressure. We would like better relations with the US, but we won't submit to them. He said that Americans are pursuing, as I said, a very reckless strategy in Lebanon, and he said that he will pursue, prosecute the U.S. Treasury for this decision in one way or another, by using a U.S. based law firm to try to prove that they have no evidence for their claims about his corruption, and that this is a purely political decision.
And which, by the way, the U.S. gave no details. Essentially, they said, "Oh, Bassil is corrupt." I think the one detail that they gave was in the Treasury statement. They sent out statements from the Department of the Treasury and the Department of State. The Treasury statement didn't make mention of Hezbollah. The state one did. Also, the Treasury Department statement, if I'm remembering correctly, did mention one thing that the corruption thing was related to deals that he had conducted while energy minister in 2014. He was only caretaker energy minister in 2014 for like a month and a half. So I think people really need to take a look at that and see, where this might be, what the U.S. is pointing to. But at the same time, it was just very weak justification from the United States as to, they're basically just calling out corruption here, but then offering absolutely nothing to support it, no leads, no way to really follow up on it, so that if Bassil is corrupt, a competent judiciary could go after him in theory, but only if they actually know what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting that Basile went all the way, out against the US, and he said things like, the US has a whole agenda that is against Lebanon's interests, including naturalizing refugees and peace with Israel on Israel's terms, and relaxed approach to terrorism, many things. But he also talked about the fact that the FPM has fundamental conflicts with Hezbollah, which is something that he usually doesn't elaborate on. Neither the FPM nor Hezbollah talk about this extensively. So recently, we heard once Basil saying that a divergence with Hezbollah is a possibility. And now he elaborated on it, saying that, Hezbollah and the FPM have one of the main issues on which they have conflict is, first of all, the type of the state in Lebanon. But the FPM believes in a civil state as opposed to an Islamic or Christian state or whatever. That's debatable how that's translated in practice, But he also said that Hezbollah has a position against Israel completely, while the FPM believes in Israel's right to exist and to be safe as part of, the Arab peace initiative and like establishing of two states, etc. So
It's a big statement.
that's a big statement. And he
And
said that a lot of people from Hezbollah's people don't like me because of this. But this is the thing with Hezbollah: we have understanding and political, strategic alliance, but it's not based on full agreement on everything. Yeah.
yeah, but despite this, his sort of like listing of the ways we're different from Hezbollah, this was his moment where he really came through and sort of proved to them that, like, okay, well, you trusted my father-in-law and you trust my father-in-law, Michel Aoun. He's not going to be president forever. His term ends in 2022. I want to be president. You can trust me the same way, because when the pressure is on, I'm going to stand with you ultimately.
Yeah, this is one of the main things to take away from this whole thing, that Bassil is kind of gaining points. He improved his score with Hezbollah quite significantly, I think, with this press talk
Absolutely.
and this position that he took, confronting someone like the U.S. administration. They won't forget it, I think. Whether this means that he will actually become president against a lot of political odds, we'll see. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely now more comfortable shifting to a more clearly anti US kind of discourse, as opposed to what he always had and what all the FPM always had, which is saying, we have a memorandum of understanding with Hezbollah, but we are kind of closer to the West and how the West thinks and how it does things, etc. So now it's becoming more tricky. I think it's going to become more tricky.
Yeah, and a lot of people responded to this announcement with glee. I think that's the only word that describes it, like
Mm.
unfettered glee. I haven't really been able to share that personally, just because I think, yeah, okay, so you can recognize that Bassil is a part of the system that is incredibly fucked up, and he's playing a certain role that certainly is not helpful at times. But at the same time, I think you can sort of separate out the issue of who Gebran Bassil is and whether you support him from, well, is this U.S., basically interference in domestic political affairs of Lebanon, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And if things went down as Bassil said, with the U.S. giving him this ultimatum to break ties with Hezbollah, which would be this huge fundamental shift, right? If that actually happened, it is just mind-boggling to me. Like, are U.S. policymakers, are people at state paying attention even to what's going on in the country? Do they have any fucking idea? Because if they went with that line, if this is accurate, then it shows really just a misunderstanding of the domestic political situation in the country.
Yeah, and the tendency to accept, scenarios of war and scenarios of geographical division, because this is where you get if you try to corner Hezbollah. With all my with all the resentment I have for a lot of Hezbollah's politics, we tried this in the past. Like Lebanon has tried this thing where different forces try to corner, uh, regardless of who is it, on the left or on the right, but try to isolate a section of the population. Not more importantly, like a militia, a very strong militia, and that's not going to go well. So what you're saying is it shows that they don't know the local context enough, and what I'm saying is if they know, then it's worse.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, again, it seems to have backfired, if this is the case. So quickly, though, I want to make clear what this actually means on the ground. This basically just means Bassil is cut off from the global financial system. Like, he's not going to be able to get an American Express card. He, any bank essentially in the world isn't going to want to deal with him. Which, maybe that's bad for him personally, but it really doesn't do a whole lot beyond that. He can still be a minister. He can still be president. He can, he is an MP. That doesn't change, at least on paper, right? But you have a lot of people talking about how just this affects his reputation a lot more. And it becomes harder for him to become president, for instance. It becomes harder for him to have complete freedom in negotiations over cabinet formation. Whether this will actually serve to slow down the cabinet formation process or not, I'm not entirely sure, but it's already going pretty slowly. Uh, I mean, things were not going swimmingly before this anyway.
Yeah.
But with Hariri, it just seems as though things are plodding along per normal, as if we went in a time machine back to 2018, where things just took months and months and months to iron out. And there was this whole question with Druze representation and with Maronite representation and who gets what seats. And it seems as though they're playing the exact same fucking game again. Like,
Yeah.
there was, in the aftermath of the port explosion and the resignation of the Diab government, there was a big push. Like, oh no, we need a new government now. Emmanuel Macron visited the country twice, and there was a whole lot of energy behind. Okay, let's do this. Let's get a new government in place by September 15th. All of this stuff, and to me, I hope that I'm just wrong on this, but I feel as though all of that urgency has just left, and we are back in the normal, like, okay, Hariri and Aoun or Hariri and Bassil negotiating over shares and doing it in a very slow manner.
Definitely. And this is one of the most concerning things about Hariri coming back, returning as prime minister, is that it's really the return of politics as usual. And he's making it
In
clear.
more ways than one, yeah.
Yeah. And I think also happened with the forensic audit at VDL tells the same story, right? So
Yeah.
we're into more and more delays, right? Because the main issue is, will Lebanon save itself from a complete financial collapse and meltdown, um, and get some money in order to revive the financial system to an extent, or basically, what is the action plan that will take us in one of the two directions? And I think this week we're getting bad signs from the audit aspect as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it may be connected to cabinet formation as well. Some people speculate. So we've been talking about this forensic audit of BDL for a while now. Eventually, the cabinet approved it eventually, and they signed a contract with Alvarez and Marcel, international consultancy firm that does auditing. And it was this past week that was the deadline for BDL to submit a bunch of documents, bunch of information to the auditing firm, and they missed it. And basically what they did, I think Forbes came out and said that they had supplied 43% of the information or something like that requested by Alvarez. Now, BDL claims wrongly that banking secrecy precludes them from supplying any of the rest of the information. Now, this is wrong because multiple legal experts have come out and said, no, that's not how things work. This is a lawful contract. You don't just get to basically shield all of your accounts from a forensic audit just because of banking secrecy. First off, public monies are not covered by banking secrecy. And second off, there are just like standard ways of getting around other banking secrecy issues where they actually are applicable. Where they are applicable is, maybe dealing with local banks and stuff like that. But you can get around that by simply identifying these banks. Instead of saying Bank Audi did such and such, you say, local bank number 4 did such and such. And this is sort of like international practice. So BDL really doesn't have a legal leg to stand on here, but they're standing on it regardless. And this past week, there was a big meeting because all of these issues came to a head. There was a big meeting, I think, on Thursday in Baabda with Aoun, Saleme, Ghazi Wazni, the finance minister, and a representative from Alvarez and Marcel. And they essentially agreed to give the audit in BDL a 3-month extension to get all these documents together and send them to the auditing firm. Now, this is a legally questionable thing, whether they can actually do this, but it's very worrying because, 3 months is a very, very long time for BDL to supply records that they should have submitted this past week or before. They should have all of this stuff basically ready to go. It shouldn't take them 3 months to get everything together. And what some people have speculated is that this is a way to push off the audit far enough into the future where maybe in the meantime people will sort of forget about it. Maybe you can get a new government in place that will sort of either end the audit or sort of declaw it so that you don't get the information that everybody wants. But this is part of the problem, right? Because if this audit doesn't go forward, then there is no accountability. There's no way to actually see in detail specifically how the financial system collapsed in the country. Now we know broad strokes. We know like the overall story of this, but we don't know specifically who did what, when. And that's what you need if you want, say, a competent judiciary at some point in the future to hold people accountable for what went wrong.
Yeah, definitely. And just the idea that, a basic mechanism of accountability like this one, where everyone knows that there's a problem with what BDL has done over the years, and everyone knows that without a forensic audit, you won't actually get this accountability. The fact that not only we still have the same leadership at BDL, I mean, they did elections, but the governor is still there. And he's, the man behind the chaos that we're living right now to an extent, and no one accepted to remove him or replace him, but also like they're giving him basically they're letting him and themselves through him get away with murder by like refusing to cooperate with the audit company. And we saw Ibrahim Kanaan, the FPM MP, who is known to be probably the loyal servant to the banks in the parliament for sure, and to BDL. Kanaan said basically that the contract with the company should be reconsidered and amended in a way that doesn't contradict the laws, which is fascinating that this is his solution to how you do it. We can only give 43% of the documents or of the information. Then let's make the contract restricted to these 43% rather than open up the files that should be opened. So it just shows how they're complicit with the lack of accountability.
I mean, it looks as though there's a cover up going on.
Yeah.
Essentially, there's an attempt at a cover up. That's what it looks like from the outside. And that wasn't the only area that BDL has been in hot water in over the past month since we last came to you. Also, in this time, BDL has instituted these sort of cash lira policies. There are a couple of them. One of them requires importers to provide cash lira if they want to make use of this subsidized exchange rate 1507, which is something that is open to importers of really basic items, especially fuel, wheat, and medicine, as well as medical equipment. These are things that hospitals rely on quite a bit. At the same time, BDL instituted another policy that basically made it harder for banks to withdraw cash lira from BDL, basically introducing some penalties. And it's this complicated mechanism that depends on the bank, and there's a formula involved apparently. But long story short, it means that certain banks, at very least, won't make as much money if they take out cash lira, and certain banks have passed this on to their own depositors. So if you have an account at one of these banks, maybe you saw your withdrawal limit for cash lira lowered recently. And so it seems as though BDL is trying to do a very quick about face on their lirification policy, actually, which has, what we've seen over the past year is BDL and the banks realizing how big a hole they have in their balance sheets as far as dollars go. They owe a lot more dollars than the dollars that they have, right?
Mm.
And so the way to fix this, the BDL has been pursuing for several months, is this sort of slow motion lirification process, especially through like Circular 151, for instance, that allowed people who have bank accounts in dollars to withdraw those dollars in lira at a higher rate. I think now it's 3,900. So what we saw as a result of this policy was a big explosion in the amount of lira in circulation. And now BDL is going, let's switch that. Let's turn it around and really, try to suck that cash lira back up through this policy aimed at importers, and then also limit the amount of cash lira that we are allowing into the system through the banks. And this has caused a lot of problems for people, just everyday depositors. You get your paycheck or whatever at the end of the month. Well, maybe you can't pull out your entire paycheck now, or maybe you can't pay for some if you have some big expense or whatever. You're not even allowed to access the lira that you need to pay for that. But it's also had a big effect on hospitals themselves, because as I mentioned earlier, like all of this stuff is imported. The drugs, or not all of it, but a large portion of the drugs and the medical equipment that is needed to do basic things is imported from abroad. And we saw the private hospitals coming out and saying, we can't deal with this cash lira policy. It's ludicrous. It's insane. We can't pay for this stuff in cash. We can't pay the importers in cash. The importers are saying, well, we have to have cash because otherwise BDL won't deal with us. And it's gotten to a point where private hospitals are saying, well, we may have to actually close our doors to non-emergency and non-life-threatening cases. And they've started, at least some hospitals have started to delay surgeries, do certain things that certainly are starting to affect patient care, not for the better. And all of this is happening in the middle of a pandemic, which is even more insane, right?
Yeah, I mean, the big question now is Lebanon anyway able to manage this wave? I don't know if it's a wave or it's just, the continuation of the wave, but this terrible situation that we are that we are in terms of the number of people, the number of total cases we have. I mean, I believe that, we now have more total cases than China, which is just funny. But also like 40,000, 45,000 active cases. That's a lot of
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
And a percentage of the population every day now is being infected, and that's really different from the early days where we had a few cases from abroad, etc.
Yeah, it is really scary. The numbers, like you say, about 45,000 active cases right now. A month ago, there were only 26,000. 2 months ago, 14,000. 3 months ago, 4K. So if you actually look at this, if you plot it out on a graph, or you go to Worldometer or one of these websites that has these stats, you can see the exponential growth very, very plain. And we continue to shoot up higher and faster with every passing week, which is super, super concerning, especially because what happens afterwards? Well, you see the case numbers shoot up first, and then you see hospitalizations shoot up. And right now we're already at, according to the World Health Organization, 70% of the 807 regular beds are filled. This is as of their report just Saturday. And 86% of the 325 ICU beds are full right now. Now they're trying to expand capacity and everything like that, but expanding capacity is very, very hard. And it's not just a matter of, buying more ventilators or something. You have to have the staff, you have to, have all of these other things in place also to build capacity. So, and if we're racing against, if it's the virus versus us building capacity, the virus is going to spread more quickly than the capacity can be lifted. The authorities are starting to respond to this a little bit. Last week, they instituted a curfew again, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. And it looks as though they may announce a lockdown this week. All right, so that's just one of the many things that is going wrong right now, and it's very concerning. But we also got news this week about something else, something that happened right when Lebanon started this upswing in coronavirus cases. The upswing had already began when the port explosion happened on August 4th. We are very belatedly starting to see, how the investigation is going and who they're going to try to point the finger at, and who they're going to try to hold accountable for this, massive man-made disaster. The Higher Judicial Council announced Saturday that 25 people have been arrested in connection with the investigation. Also, 3 arrest warrants have been issued in absentia. 51 witnesses have given statements, and they said that, we're working as fast as possible, but without rushing. The Bar Association has also filed several hundred complaints with the judiciary against individuals. So we'll see what happens with that as well. But there's a sense, maybe, that authorities aren't quite doing as much as they should right now. And if you compare those numbers, just compare the numbers, how many people the Bar Association thinks should be charged and how many people the HJC has even talked to. 51 people being interviewed, that is not a very in-depth investigation for the scale of calamity that happened.
Especially with the amount of ambiguity that exists, right? Because what we know about the investigations so far are mostly through judicial sources talking to media. Friend of the show, Taimur Azhari, has been doing a great job, like keeping us up to date with the investigations by different people, right? Because so we had the official Lebanese investigation led by Judge Fadi Sawan. This is like basically the state authorized investigation of the event, which is the most important thing happening surrounding investigation. And then you have people like the French and the Americans, and I think the British, that launched their own investigations into the blast in the last, couple of months. And what we knew before is that the FBI handed someone their findings, and they didn't have an assertive conclusion on what caused the event. So we don't even know yet if it's intentional or an accident. And the French experts, according to Timur's reporting, have also reached the same conclusion, which is we don't know yet how the blast happened and whether it was an act of terrorism or not, or you know it was instigated on purpose or not. But what we know is that the whole approach to accountability with this investigation, and whereas we were promised big things like maximum punishment to whoever caused this, and going all the way up and not shying away from real accountability from the president and the prime minister and everyone, this is not what's happening.
Yeah.
Like they're looking at, according to Timur and other people's reports, they're looking at maximum 5 years, which is in Lebanese prison time, like less than 4 years of sentences for mid and low level administrative officials who, or maybe security officials, I'm not sure, who, fell short or, are accused or charged with willful negligence. It sounds right? Willful negligence is quite kind of uh, accurate in terms of what happened or what we think happened, if it wasn't an intentional, explosion. But there is more than that, because there are people who appointed these people without them having the competencies, right? The skills to do things, or the credibility. There are people who had who were managing the port and the customs, who were directly responsible for overseeing this area, and they failed to do anything about it. And you have, someone like Badr Daher, former head of the customs, who is now arrested.
Current head of the customs.
Sorry, current head of the.
I mean,
I'm
he's
always
suspended
yeah,
or whatever. He's under house arrest, but Aoun refused to dismiss him or the other port officials from their jobs.
which was, I mean, really, how surreal is this country? Like, the first thing that you would do after
Yeah,
this moment is basically remove. I think you should like change the whole leadership of the port, like absolutely from scratch. Bring in new people. Let these people go have other jobs if they're not responsible for what happened. But like, for fuck's sake, just bring in new people. Like the same with BDL. No change at all. Even though there is so much accountability there to be held. So anyway, it's just a bit depressing that this is where they take us, and it looks like, like you were saying before, it seems that they're covering up to their crimes by avoiding any serious change and any serious accountability. And kind of similarly to what we were seeing with the central bank, we're seeing with the port investigation. It's more of the same old mentality, and there is no evidence yet from anyone in the political class that there is a serious consideration of um, changing anything about the structure of power in this country, or anything that kind of gives real hope to realistic people that things might change to the better. So I don't know about the IMF or Macron or whoever, any foreign actors are looking at the Lebanese situation right now. How are they thinking that this is something that we can work with? I wouldn't believe it if they are. I wouldn't be. I didn't. I was surprised that Macron accepted the idea of Hariri coming back, and now I'm even more shocked at how patient they have been. To be honest, like, if I don't think Hariri will succeed in getting IMF money, which is basically one of the most important mandates for his upcoming government if it's formed. So I'm feeling like we're just headed to more failure, and a collapse. I mean, things are pretty shitty, but we haven't reached the bottom. We should always remember that we
Right.
haven't.
We're still waiting. Hopefully none of this happens, but we can see on the horizon the potential for us to sort of go over the cliff on coronavirus if hospital capacity is reached. We can see the potential as well, the very real potential of BDL basically running out of dollars, and or deciding we're not going to touch the required reserves, and therefore all of this, the subsidized imports is going to stop, which is going to be an absolute social catastrophe when it does happen. And they've telegraphed that this will probably happen, by the end of the year, thereabouts. And so, we are before that. We haven't gone over these cliffs yet. Hopefully, we will not. But we can see, oh my God, things are about to get so much worse than we could possibly imagine. And in the meantime, what's happening? It appears as though there's sort of, I mean, I can't say that there's a cover up or anything in either of these cases with the BDL audit or with what's gone on at the port, but it smells like a cover up. It seems as though there's no interest in accountability or transparency or anything. BDL is very unclear when it comes to actually communicating any of its policies with the public. And it has obfuscated things. It has come out and said things that are just plain wrong, like its reliance on banking secrecy. And that just looks like they're trying to cover stuff up. They're trying to use banking secrecy as a shield so that all of these people, which probably it's a lot of the political class that would be implicated, all of this information never gets out. Or at very least, maybe it's banks that are protected by this. We don't know, but certainly something is fishy that is going on here. At the same time, something fishy is going on when you have a massive explosion that takes out a huge swath of the city, kills over 200 people, and then all of a sudden it seems as though there's very, very little interest in accountability and finding out what really happened. And when we do get a few leaks here and there of what's going on, we hear it is directed at low-level officials and all of that, which makes you think, oh, something is fishy here again, because certainly ministers knew, high-ranking politicians knew certain things about this. So to me, it really is unbelievable the degree to which the political class has basically just gone back to politics as usual and said, okay, we can avoid this problem with BDL by delaying it. We can avoid this problem with the port by just delaying it and holding a few low-level people accountable. And in the meantime, we'll take our time on cabinet formation, because ultimately it matters whether I get 5 seats instead of 4 in the cabinet. That's more important than actually doing any reforms or getting things done.
Yeah, and I agree with all of what you said, and I think that the degree of desperation that this is causing, when you look at the port explosion, for example, and you see that there is no accountability, you feel, okay, there is nothing that is beyond the lines of what there's nothing that they wouldn't do to stay in power. The case of Badr Daher from the customs is one example. Right now that he is arrested, we also knew that he's been charged with receiving a bribe um, to let a Saudi prince who had smuggled drugs into Lebanon escape from Lebanon in return for a lot of money. So one of the points that I think Timur made it as well is that when he left his position, when he was forced to leave his position, now we're finding things out about his commitments, like things that he's committed in the past. What would happen if Salami loses, his position in the central bank, or Berri in the parliament, etc.? So many of these people have a lot of dirt that could be undug. So allegedly, obviously, as journalists, allegedly. So yeah, so when you have this hopelessness, not only do you become less interested in change, people also become more reactionary, and people also it creates a certain ideological vacuum whereby people feel that the present is like the worst thing. Like it's an apocalyptic time, and they start getting polarized over, conflicts that don't really matter to their, that aren't really directly connected to their own interests. And this is what we're seeing, I think, from the propaganda that is happening both by, Hezbollah and its allies, and by the LF and the other camp. There isn't a camp now, but by the anti-Hezbollah front, including from within the anti-establishment movement. We're seeing this polarization, and it makes me scared. It will eventually happen, because there is a serious conflict about who controls decision making in Lebanon and how. But the way in which it's happening today is really scary. Same old politics happening at the official level, and on the grassroots level, people are becoming more and more polarized. And a lot of people are saying, if these people are going to stay in Lebanon, I can't stay in Lebanon anymore. And there is like kind of an existential. We're at this existential crossroad, the country. So I'm just worried that people will be, taken to not the extremes, but just like on polarization based on the interest of the ruling class. As long as this is the politics we have, zero accountability, but a lot of political conflict over other things. U.S. sanctions, all of the every basically every bit of politics that is happening to reinstitute the same old politics, as opposed to bring in something new.
Yeah, things are not going, I think, in the right direction on any level. It seems.
Yeah.
Well, on that note,
On that great note,
I think that's it for us this week. You got anything else?
I don't think so.
I don't think, all right.
Yeah, it's just a very interesting time, right? There's so many things happening, and I
It's
think,
literally too much to keep up with. It's
yeah.
insane. I have no idea really what's going on in the U.S. because I've been so wrapped up in what's been going on
also
here.
because
Yeah.
you're like managing editor of a new publication, and you were
Time
working
is
like
at a premium. Yeah.
but I hope we were able to give a certain idea of the situation, because we've been off for so long. So uh, also, like, just there hasn't been a lot of interaction from our side, but let us, like, just listeners, let us know what you think. If there are things we haven't covered well, we're always interested in your feedback. We might seem like we're lazy these times, but we're not. We're just overwhelmed. We're still
or in the hospital
or in
sometimes.
the hospital.
Yeah.
Just still very passionate about this. So share the show around. Let us know what you think, etc. It's good to just keep the conversation alive.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, this is, we're in it right now, and over the course of the next few months, it's going to be decisive for Lebanon. I think.
Yeah, it's going to be a time to remember. I think we'll reflect on it in a couple of years, and
Yeah.
we'll say, this was an intense time to be alive.
Yeah. For all the wrong reasons. All right. Well, that's it for us for this week. We will be back with you as soon as we can. No promises as to when exactly, but hopefully next week. Until then, I'm Benjamin Red.
I'm Nizar Hassan.
And this has been the Lebanese Politics Podcast.
The Lebanese Politics Podcast is brought to you by myself, Nizar Hassan, Benjamin Red, produced behind the scenes by Susan Wilson, and the music is by Omar El Fil.